The war chamber of the Obsidian Citadel was the largest room ever built by any species in the known galaxy. It was carved from the heart of a living asteroid, and its black walls stretched so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of officers sat in rows that climbed upward like the inside of a bowl, and at the very center, on a throne made from the bones of a dead star, sat Emperor Zorath the Ninth. He was ancient. Nobody knew exactly how old he was, but the Draelith people whispered that he had watched stars being born. His scales were the color of deep space, and his 4 eyes glowed like dying suns. He had ruled the galactic hegemony for longer than most species had existed, and in all that time he had never lost a war. Not once. The hegemony controlled over 40,000 star systems, and had crushed more than 900 species under its heel. Some of those species no longer existed at all. Today, the Emperor was hungry for another world. "The system is called Sol," said the voice of the strategic advisor, a thin creature named Dravik, who floated above a holographic map. A small yellow star appeared in the display, surrounded by a handful of tiny planets. It sits on the far edge of the Orion Arm, one inhabited world, one dominant species. They call themselves humans. A murmur of amusement rippled through the war chamber. The display showed images of the humans, soft, small creatures with no claws, no armor plates, no venom glands. They had thin skin that tore easily and bones that broke under modest pressure. Several officers laughed openly. Emperor Zorath leaned forward on his throne. "How many warships do they have?" "Our intelligence suggests fewer than 300 combat-capable vessels," Dravik answered. "None match even our mid-weight cruisers in firepower." The Emperor smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then this will not be a war. It will be a collection." That was when General Tarvek stood up. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. Tarvek was not a small creature. He stood nearly 8 feet tall and was covered in battle scars that crossed his gray scales like rivers on a map. He had fought in 37 campaigns across the galaxy and had won every single one of them. Every single one except the last. "My Emperor," Tarvek said, and his deep voice echoed off the black walls. "I ask permission to speak." Zorath waved one clawed hand lazily. "Speak." Tarvek walked down the steps toward the center of the chamber. His boots were heavy on the stone floor. He stopped in front of the holographic map and stared at the small yellow star called Sol, and for a long moment he said nothing. The chamber grew quiet. 20 cycles ago," he began, "I was ordered to enter human space with a scouting fleet. 200 warships. Our mission was simple. We were to test their defenses, gather intelligence, and withdraw. It was supposed to take 3 days. He paused. The silence in the chamber was thick. It took 11 days. I entered human space with 200 ships. I left with 132. Now the chamber was truly silent. 68 warships lost in a scouting mission against a species with inferior technology. That was not a skirmish. That was a disaster. They did not fight the way any species fights, Tarvek continued. His voice was steady, but those who knew him well could hear something underneath it. Something that sounded like fear. When we destroyed their military vessels, their civilian ships attacked us. Mining ships, cargo haulers, transport barges. They welded weapons onto anything that could fly and threw themselves at us. He turned to face the Emperor directly. When we disabled their ships, the crews did not surrender. They overloaded their own reactors and rammed our vessels. They used their dying ships as weapons. I watched a human captain broadcast a message to us while her ship burned around her. She was laughing. She flew what was left of her vessel directly into the hangar bay of my carrier and detonated her engine core. That single human killed 400 of my soldiers. A heavy quiet fell over the chamber. Tarvek's eyes were distant, as if he was seeing it all again. They learn, he said softly. That is what makes them dangerous. Every engagement, they learned. They studied our weapons, our shields, our tactics. By the third day, their weapons were already more effective against us. By the seventh day, they had found weaknesses in our shield harmonics that our own engineers did not know about. They adapted faster than any species I have ever fought, and I have fought 37. He stepped closer to the throne. Guards shifted nervously, but the Emperor did not move. My Emperor, I have served you faithfully for my entire life. I have never asked you for anything. I am asking you now. Leave humanity alone. They are not like the others. They are not prey. They are something else entirely. Something this galaxy has never seen before. For a long moment, Emperor Zorath simply stared at him. Then he turned to the officers in the chamber and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. Is this what our greatest general has become? A creature afraid of soft-skinned animals from a backwater star? It was cruel laughter. The kind that powerful beings use when they want to make someone feel small. A figure rose from the front row. High Admiral Salith was tall, elegant, and ambitious. Her scales shone like polished silver, and her eyes burned with hunger for glory. She had never lost a battle, though she had also never fought an enemy that truly challenged her. My Emperor, she said, her voice clear and sharp, give me the fleet. I will bring you this little world and its little species. I will hang their flags in this very chamber as trophies. The Emperor's 4 eyes glittered. You shall have 10,000 warships, High Admiral, the largest armada ever assembled. Bring me Earth. Salith bowed deeply. The chamber erupted in cheering. Tarvek stood alone in the center of it all, surrounded by the roar of 10,000 voices, and felt something cold settle into his bones. He looked up at the holographic map, at that small yellow star on the edge of the galaxy, and he thought of the human captain who had laughed while their ship burned. He turned and walked out of the chamber. No one noticed him leave. In the corridor outside, the noise faded behind the heavy doors. Tarvek stopped, placed one scarred hand against the cold wall, and closed his eyes. They have no idea, he whispered to the darkness. They have absolutely no idea what they have just done. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting that small yellow star, a woman named Elena Vasquez sat in an underground command center and watched a screen full of data. Deep space sensors had detected a massive energy signature forming on the far side of the galaxy. Something very large was being assembled. Vasquez picked up a communicator and spoke one sentence. High Admiral Salith stood on the command bridge of the Throne's Fury, the largest warship ever built by the Draelith people. It was 3 kilometers long from nose to tail, covered in enough armor to survive the heat of a star, and carried enough weapons to crack a planet in half. Behind it, stretching across the blackness of space like a wall of iron and fire, were 10,000 warships. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, dreadnoughts. A fleet so massive that when it moved through hyperspace, it bent the fabric of reality around it. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, beyond the orbit of the farthest planet. Salith had timed the arrival perfectly. All 10,000 ships appeared at once, filling the darkness with light and metal. It was the kind of entrance designed to make entire civilizations fall to their knees. She waited for the panic. She waited for the desperate transmissions, the begging, the offers of surrender. She had seen it 100 times before, with 100 different species. The moment they saw the size of the hegemony's fleet, their will to fight crumbled like sand. But the humans sent nothing. No transmissions, no signals, no fleet rushing out to meet them. Not even a single probe or satellite ping. The Sol system was completely and totally silent, as if no one was home. Salith's second officer, a nervous young male named Korath, shifted at his station. High Admiral, all channels are quiet. No response on any frequency. They are probably too primitive to detect us at this range, Salith said, though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that this was wrong. Her intelligence reports said the humans had deep space sensors. They should know the fleet was here. She pushed the thought aside. All ships advance. Standard conquest formation. We move inward. 10,000 warships began to move toward the heart of the Sol system. They passed the outer planets without incident. The gas giants rolled silently in their orbits, enormous and uncaring. Salith watched the tactical display as her fleet moved through the empty darkness between worlds. Everything was quiet. Everything was calm. Too calm. The first ship disappeared near the orbit of Saturn. A destroyer on the far left edge of the formation simply stopped transmitting. No explosion, no distress signal. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was gone, as if space itself had swallowed it. Salith frowned. Sensor malfunction. Move on. Then a second ship vanished, and a third, and a fourth. All of them on the outer edges of the formation. All of them silent. Korath's voice had lost all its steadiness. High Admiral, we have lost 9 ships in the last hour. No wreckage detected. No energy signatures. They are simply gone. A cold feeling began to crawl up Salith's spine. She had fought many enemies, but none of them had ever made her ships simply disappear. She ordered the fleet to tighten formation and increase scanner range to maximum. That was when they entered the asteroid belt. The belt between Mars and Jupiter was a vast river of rocks, millions of them tumbling slowly through space. Salith's scanners showed nothing unusual. Just rocks. Just dead, silent, floating rocks, ranging in size from pebbles to small moons. They were halfway through the belt when one of the rocks opened its eyes. That was how Korath would later describe it. A boulder the size of a building suddenly split apart, and from inside it came light and fire and death. A weapon hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid fired a slug of dense metal at a speed that should not have been possible. The slug tore through a Drelith cruiser from bow to stern, and the ship broke in half like a toy. Then 100 more rocks opened up, then 1,000. The entire asteroid belt came alive. Weapons platforms hidden inside ordinary-looking rocks fired from every direction at once. There was no front line, no flanking position, no safe direction. The Drelith fleet was surrounded by enemies that looked exactly like the millions of harmless rocks floating all around them. And there was no way to tell which rock was a weapon and which was just a rock. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, aboard a battered old mining hauler called the Stubborn Mule, Captain Jonah Mwangi leaned back in his chair and smiled. Mwangi was a tall man with dark skin, a shaved head, and calm brown eyes that never seemed to hurry. He had been a belt miner before the military recruited him, and he knew the asteroid belt better than anyone alive. He had spent the last 5 years personally overseeing the construction of the Beltline. 3,000 weapons platforms, hidden inside asteroids, scattered across millions of kilometers of space. All stations, fire pattern Delta, he said calmly into his communicator. Hit them, then go dark. Reposition. Hit them again. The Beltline fighters obeyed. They fired devastating volleys, then shut down all power and drifted among the rocks, invisible. By the time the Drelith ships turned their weapons toward the source of the attack, there was nothing there but silent stone. Salith screamed orders at her officers. She threw everything she had at the asteroid belt, blasting rocks apart by the thousands. But for every weapons platform she destroyed, she wasted 50 shots on empty rocks. The humans were ghosts among the stones, and every minute that passed cost her another ship. In 4 hours, she lost 400 warships. She had not seen a single human vessel clearly, not one. On the command bridge of the Throne's Fury, Salith gripped the arms of her chair until her claws cracked the metal. She was High Admiral of the Galactic Hegemony. She would not be humiliated by creatures who hid in rocks. "Full advance," she ordered. "All ships push through the belt. Make for Mars. We will crush them on open ground." Her officers exchanged uneasy looks but obeyed. The armada surged forward, taking losses with every kilometer, and pushed through the asteroid belt toward the Era planets. Far behind the battle, aboard a small observation ship, General Tarvek had not been invited to this war, but he had come anyway. He had called in every favor he had left to secure a place on a supply vessel near the rear of the fleet. Now he sat in a dark room, watching the battle data scroll across his screen, and his blood turned to ice. Their belt-line platforms were pulling back, going silent, melting away as the Dralith fleet advanced. To Salith, this looked like victory. She was pushing them back. She was winning. But Tarvek had seen this before. 20 years ago, in his own disastrous encounter with humans, they had done the same thing. They had fallen back step by step, drawing his ships deeper and deeper into their space. He had thought he was chasing them. He later realized they had been leading him into a trap. The humans were not retreating. They were making room. He tried to send a message to Salith's flagship. His communication request was denied. He was not authorized to contact the High Admiral. Tarvek stared at the screen. The Dralith fleet pushed past the asteroid belt and headed toward Mars. Ahead of them, the humans waited in silence. On Earth, deep underground in a bunker that could survive the death of the sun, Colonel Elena Vasquez watched the same battle on a holographic display. Her officers were tense, but she was perfectly still. Her gray eyes followed every ship movement, every weapon discharge, every Dralith formation change. "They are through the belt," said her aide, moving toward Mars. Vasquez nodded slowly. The asteroid belt was Layer 1. It was designed to test the enemy, to gather data, to study how they fought, how they reacted, how they thought. Every single shot the Dralith fired, every maneuver they made, every shield frequency they used, all of it was being recorded and fed into a system that was learning. "How much data did we collect?" she asked. "More than enough." Vasquez allowed herself a small, cold smile. "Good. Let them come to Mars. Let them see Layer 2. She looked at the display, at the thousands of Dralith warships swarming toward the red planet, and she thought of something her grandmother had once told her. Never interrupt your enemy while they are making a mistake. The Dralith fleet flew toward Mars. They thought they were winning. They thought the hardest part was over. They had no idea that it had not yet begun. Mars had always been a red, dead world. For billions of years it sat quietly in its orbit, a ball of rust and dust with nothing to offer anyone. But humans did not see dead worlds. They saw raw material. High Admiral Salith brought her fleet into orbit around Mars and prepared to bypass the planet entirely. It was a dead rock, useless, not worth the time. Her target was Earth, the soft blue world closer to the sun, where the humans actually lived. Mars was simply in the way. Then, Mars bit her. The first railgun shot came from a crater on the planet's southern hemisphere. It was a slug of ultra-dense tungsten, accelerated by electromagnetic coils buried deep beneath the Martian surface. The slug traveled at nearly 1% of the speed of light. At that velocity, it did not need explosives. The sheer energy of its impact was enough. It hit a Dralith battlecruiser dead center. The ship did not explode. One moment, there was a warship. The next moment, there was a cloud of superheated gas expanding outward in a perfect sphere. Before Salith could even process what had happened, 100 more shots followed. They came from craters, from mountain peaks, from trenches carved into the surface. The entire planet was covered in weapons, and all of them were firing at once. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Salith screamed. But her ships were big, and her formations were tight. The railgun slugs moved at speeds that made dodging nearly impossible. In the first 10 minutes, she lost 200 ships. Then, The drones came. They poured from openings in the Martian surface like insects from a nest. Millions of them, each one no larger than a human fist, each one carrying a shaped explosive charge. They moved in swarms so thick that they showed up on sensors as clouds rather than individual objects. They struck Drelith ships by the thousands, crawling across hulls, finding weak points in armor, and detonating in sequence. One drone was nothing. 100 drones were an annoyance. 10,000 drones concentrated on a single ship could peel it open like fruit. Salith threw fighters at the swarms, but it was like trying to fight a river with a sword. For every 1,000 drones destroyed, 10,000 more rose from the Martian caves. The battle for Mars lasted 18 hours. It was the worst experience of Salith's career. Every minute was a grinding, ugly fight against an enemy that could not be seen clearly, could not be engaged directly, and never stopped coming. Her ships pushed forward kilometer by kilometer, and every kilometer cost her dearly. The railguns never stopped firing. The drones never stopped swarming. By the time her fleet cleared Mars orbit and limped toward the inner system, she had lost 2,000 more ships. Her original force of 10,000 had been reduced to roughly 6,000, and she had not yet seen the planet she was supposed to conquer. But the losses were not the worst part. The worst part was what her boarding teams found. During the battle, several Drelith assault groups had managed to board human stations and captured vessels near Mars. Salith expected to find frightened prisoners eager to surrender information. Instead, she found something that shook her officers to their core. The humans fought to the last person, not because someone ordered them to. There were no officers standing behind them with weapons, no threats of punishment for surrender. They simply refused to stop fighting. Wounded humans dragged themselves through corridors with broken bones, firing weapons with whatever hands still worked. Medical bays were rigged with explosives that detonated the moment Drelith soldiers entered. On one captured station, a boarding team cornered a single human engineer. She was small, with blood on her face and a broken arm hanging at her side. She was surrounded by 20 Drelith soldiers, each one twice her size. She had no weapon. The team leader told her she would be taken prisoner and questioned. The engineer laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a frightened laugh, but a real, genuine laugh, as if someone had told her a good joke. "You still do not understand what is happening, do you?" she said. "You think you are invading us. You are wrong. We are studying you. Every shot you fire, every formation you use, every frequency your shields operate on, we are recording all of it. We have been recording since the moment you arrived, and we are learning." Then she triggered something on her belt, and the station's reactor went critical. The boarding team barely escaped. The engineer's words spread through the Drelith fleet like poison. Officers began checking their own systems and discovered something terrifying. The humans were not lying. Every engagement had been a lesson. Human weapons were becoming more effective with each battle. During the asteroid belt fight, human weapons had a kill rate of 1 ship per 30 shots. By the time the fleet reached Mars, that rate had improved to 1 ship per 12 shots. The humans were adjusting their weapons in real time, finding and exploiting weaknesses that Drelith engineers had not even known existed. Their tactics were evolving too. In the asteroid belt, the humans had used simple hit-and-run attacks. At Mars, they used coordinated swarm tactics that overloaded Drelith point defense systems. Each new engagement was different, as if the humans were a single organism that grew smarter every time it was hurt. Salith sat in her command chair and read the reports in silence. For the first time, she felt something she had never felt before in her career. She felt uncertain. She sent a request to the Emperor for reinforcements. To her relief, Zorath responded immediately. 5,000 additional warships were dispatched. He also sent a passenger, General Tarvek, stripped of his rank and sent as an observer. It was a punishment. The Emperor wanted him to watch the conquest of the species he had failed to defeat, to see what a real commander could accomplish. The reinforcement fleet arrived 3 days later. Tarvek was escorted to Salith's flagship under guard, as if he were a prisoner rather than a general. When he stepped onto the command bridge, Salith looked at him with open contempt. "So watch." Tarvek said nothing. He simply looked at the tactical display, at the positions of the human defenses, at the pattern of engagements over the past days. His old soldier's mind worked through the data, and after a few minutes, his face went pale. "You need to pull back," he said quietly. Salith turned sharply. "What did you say?" "Pull back, now, immediately." There was no pride in his voice, no politics, no agenda, just raw, honest urgency. "Look at the pattern. Every time they retreat, they give you exactly enough room to advance. They are not losing ground. They are choosing where you go. They are hurting you." "Hurting us toward what?" "I do not know, but they want you closer to Earth, and that should terrify you." Salith stared at him for a long moment. She thought of the 4,000 ships she had already lost. She thought of the engineer who had laughed. She thought of the weapons that grew more accurate with every battle. And then she thought of the Emperor. She thought of the war chamber, and the cheering crowds, and the promise she had made. She had told the Emperor she would bring him Earth. If she retreated now, she would be remembered as the second Drelith commander to run from humans. Her career would be finished. Her name would be a joke. "We advance," she said. "All ships set course for Earth." Tarvek closed his eyes. He had done everything he could. He had begged the Emperor. He had begged Salith. No one would listen. No one ever listened. He opened his eyes and looked at the blue dot on the display. Earth, such a small world to hold such a dangerous species. "Then may the old gods help us all," he said to no one in particular. The combined fleet of 11,000 warships turned toward Earth and began the final approach. Behind them, Mars sat silently in its orbit, its craters still smoking, its tunnels now empty and dark. The drones had stopped. The railguns had gone quiet. The humans had pulled everything back. They were waiting. Earth looked so peaceful from space. It was a small ball of blue and white and green, turning slowly in the light of its yellow sun. Clouds drifted across its surface like brushstrokes on a painting. Oceans sparkled. Continents lay green and brown beneath thin layers of atmosphere. It looked fragile. It looked like something that could be broken with a single well-placed strike. High Admiral Salith looked at it from the bridge of the Throne's Fury and felt confident for the first time in days. This was what she understood. A planet. A target. Something she could point her weapons at and destroy. No more hiding in asteroid belts. No more invisible enemies in the rocks. This was the final stand, and she had 11,000 warships to make it with. "All batteries, prepare for planetary bombardment," she ordered. "We will burn the surface clean and sort through the ashes afterward." Her fleet arranged itself in a massive arc, facing Earth. Thousands of weapons powering up. Energy building in capacitors that hummed like a choir of dying stars. In a few minutes, they would fire, and the surface of the planet below would turn to glass. That was when the moon cracked open. Salith's sensor officer was the first to scream. It was not a dignified sound. It was the kind of noise a creature makes when its brain cannot process what its eyes are seeing. The moon, Earth's single gray cratered moon, split along fault lines that should not have existed. Massive sections of the lunar surface swung open on hinges the size of mountains. Light poured from inside, the bright hot light of engines and reactors, and things that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. From inside the moon came a fleet. Not mining ships, not cargo haulers, not civilian vessels with weapons welded to their hulls. These were warships, real warships, built from the ground up for one purpose: to kill. They were sleek and dark and covered in weapons, and they moved with a speed and coordination that made Salith's stomach drop. There were 3,000 of them, and they poured from the moon like a river of black metal. At the head of the fleet flew a dreadnought twice the size of anything the humans should have been able to build. Its hull was dark gray, and along its side, in letters that glowed white against the black of space, was painted a name: Unconquered Sun. On the bridge of the Unconquered Sun, Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez sat in the command chair. She was older now than she had been 20 years ago, when she had rammed a burning ship into a Dralith carrier as a young captain. Her hair had turned gray, but her eyes were the same, calm, steady, and absolutely without mercy. "All ships, activate the chorus," she said. The chorus came online. It was not a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was a networked intelligence, an AI system that linked every human ship, every drone, every satellite, every railgun platform, and every soldier into a single connected mind. The chorus did not replace human commanders. It enhanced them. It processed data at speeds no biological brain could match. It predicted enemy movements based on patterns gathered from every previous engagement, and it coordinated the actions of thousands of ships as if they were fingers on a single hand. The moment the chorus activated, the battle changed. Salith had been fighting individual humans, clever, stubborn, dangerous humans, but individuals nonetheless. Now, she was fighting a single entity with 3,000 warships for a body and a mind that thought at the speed of light. The human fleet hit the Dralith armada like a hammer striking glass. Vasquez's ships did not fight in formations that any Dralith officer recognized. They flowed like water, shifting and changing shape every few seconds, finding and exploiting gaps in the Dralith line that existed for only moments before closing. Weapons fire from the human fleet was perfectly synchronized. Every shot arrived at its target at the exact same instant from multiple angles, overwhelming shields that could have handled any single attack. Dralith ships began to die, not slowly, not one at a time, but in groups of 10 and 20 and 50. The tactical display on Salith's bridge turned red with warning indicators so quickly that her officers could not keep up. In the chaos, Captain Jonah Mwangi made his move. He had brought the stubborn mule all the way from the asteroid belt, following the Dralith fleet at a safe distance, hiding among debris and wreckage. Now he pushed his old mining hauler forward at maximum speed, heading straight for the throne's fury. His target was not the ship itself. It was the shield generator array on the flagship's dorsal hull. If he could knock it out, even for a few seconds, Vasquez's dreadnoughts could finish the job. The stubborn mule was not a warship. It was an ugly, battered cargo vessel that smelled like engine grease and recycled air. It had no armor worth mentioning, and its weapons were laughable compared to what surrounded it. But Mwangi had strapped every explosive device he could find to its bow, and he flew it with the skill of a man who had spent his whole life threading needles between asteroids at high speed. The Dralith point defense guns fired at him. They hit his ship over and over. Pieces of the hull broke away, trailing fire and sparks. Warning alarms screamed. His co-pilot shouted that the ship was breaking apart. Mwangi kept flying. He hit the throne's fury at full speed. The stubborn mule crumpled against the shield array like a tin can hitting a wall. And then the explosives detonated. The shield array vanished in a ball of white fire. And for exactly 4 seconds, the throne's fury was naked. Mwangi and his crew ejected 2 seconds before impact. Their escape pods tumbled through the battle. tiny and insignificant among the giants. Vasquez did not waste those 4 seconds. The unconquered sun and 6 heavy cruisers fired everything they had into the gap. The throne's fury shuddered as shots tore through its unprotected hull, ripping open decks and destroying weapon batteries. The great flagship listed to one side, bleeding fire from a dozen wounds. On the bridge of the crippled flagship, Salith watched her tactical display with eyes that no longer understood what they were seeing. She had lost 4,000 ships in less than 2 hours. The humans were not just winning, they were dismantling her fleet with the cold precision of a surgeon cutting away disease. She made one final, desperate decision. If she could not win the battle, she would win the war. She ordered every remaining ship to ignore the human fleet and fire everything at the planet below. Forget the warships, burn Earth, kill every human on the surface. Even if the fleet was destroyed, the species would die with it. 7,000 Dralith ships turned their weapons toward Earth and fired. Beams of energy and volleys of plasma and clouds of kinetic penetrators rained down toward the blue planet. It was enough firepower to burn the surface of any world in the galaxy down to bare rock. Nothing could survive it. Nothing could stop it. A shell of golden light appeared around Earth. It flickered into existence 100 kilometers above the atmosphere, a sphere of energy so vast that it wrapped the entire planet like a second skin. The bombardment hit the shield and vanished. Energy scattered across the golden surface like rain hitting a window. The ground below was untouched. Not a single shot reached the surface. Salith stared at the shield in disbelief. Planetary-scale shields were supposed to be impossible. The energy requirements alone were beyond anything the hegemony could produce. The humans should not have been able to build this. It should not exist. But it did. On the observation ship far behind the battle, General Tarvek watched through a viewport. He saw the golden shield, and he saw the human fleet tearing through what was left of the Dralith armada, and he felt no surprise, only sadness. He had tried to warn them. He had begged. Then he noticed something that made his old heart go cold. The human fleet was no longer just defending Earth. Vasquez's ships were pushing outward, past the wreckage, past the debris field, past the dying Dralith fleet. They were not stopping at their borders. They were coming. Tarvek understood then that everything had changed. For 20 years, humanity had been a species that defended itself. Today, in this battle, in this moment, they had become something else. They had become a species that hunted. The survivors came home in pieces. Of the 15,000 warships that the Galactic hegemony had sent to conquer Earth, fewer than 1,200 returned. They limped back to Dralith space in broken groups, their hulls torn open, their crews hollow-eyed and silent. Some ships had to be towed. Others drifted back on emergency power alone, their engines dead, kept alive by nothing but backup systems and stubbornness. High Admiral Salith did not come back at all. She had been taken alive when her crippled flagship was boarded by human marines. The Dralith soldiers aboard had fought hard, but the humans moved through the corridors of the throne's fury like ghosts, working in perfect coordination, clearing rooms with a speed and efficiency that no Dralith training could match. When they found Salith on the bridge, standing with a weapon in each hand, ready to die fighting, the human squad leader simply lowered his rifle and said, "It is over, Admiral. You can stop now." She had expected execution. Instead, they treated her wounds, gave her food and water, and placed her in clean quarters with a window that looked out at the stars. No torture, no humiliation, no demands for information. When she asked the human guard why they were being kind to her, the guard seemed confused by the question. "You are a prisoner, not an animal," the guard said. "Why would we treat you badly?" Salith had personally overseen the enslavement of 4 different species. She had no answer. The news of the defeat spread across the hegemony like wildfire. For a civilization built on the idea that it could not be beaten, the loss was not just military. 40,000 star systems heard the story of a tiny species from a backwater star that had broken the greatest fleet ever assembled, and for the first time in thousands of years, cracks appeared in the foundation of the Empire. On Draelos Prime, Emperor Zorath sat on his throne and raged. He screamed at his admirals. He screamed at his advisors. He demanded a new fleet, a bigger fleet, a fleet that would drown Earth in fire and metal. But the admirals would not meet his eyes. They had seen the battle recordings. They had watched ships disappear by the thousands. They had watched the golden shield wrap around a planet like a parent protecting a child. They were not eager to go back. Then the humans did something that no conquered species, no defeated enemy, and no subject race had ever done in the entire history of the galactic hegemony. They followed. A human expeditionary fleet appeared in 3 hegemony border systems simultaneously. Not a massive armada, not an invasion force, but something almost worse. Fast, precise strike groups that moved with surgical accuracy. They destroyed military installations, disabled orbital weapons platforms, and dismantled defense networks that had taken centuries to build. They did it in hours. And then they freed the slaves. On the border world of Kethis 4, a species called the Ven had been enslaved by the hegemony for 600 years. They worked in mines and factories, lived in chains, and had forgotten what freedom felt like. When human marines landed on the surface and broke the doors of the labor camps open, the Ven did not understand what was happening. Many of them were afraid. They thought these strange, soft-skinned creatures were simply new masters. A human officer knelt down in front of a Ven elder, a frail, thin creature with clouded eyes, and spoke through a translator device. "No one owns you anymore. You are free. What happens next is your choice." The elder stared at the human for a long time. Then she began to cry. The same scene played out on a dozen worlds across the hegemony's borders. Human ships arrived, broke the chains, and left. They did not claim the territory. They did not install governors or demand tribute. They simply opened the cages and disappeared. It was the most terrifying thing the hegemony had ever experienced. An enemy that conquered territory could be understood. An enemy that set people free could not be controlled. On Draelos Prime, General Tarvek was brought before Emperor Zorath for the final time. The war chamber was quieter now. The seats that had once been filled with cheering officers were half empty. The laughter was gone. The room smelled like fear. Zorath looked at Tarvek with 4 burning eyes. The ancient emperor's hands gripped the arms of his throne so hard that the bone-white material cracked beneath his claws. "You knew," Zorath said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Tarvek said. There was no satisfaction in his voice, only weariness. "Then tell me, General, you who have faced them, you who survived them, tell me what they are. What are we truly dealing with?" Tarvek was silent for a long moment. He thought about the human captain who had laughed as her ship burned 20 years ago. He thought about the engineer who had smiled while she told the boarding team they were being studied. He thought about the guard who had been confused by the idea of treating a prisoner badly. He thought about the Marines who broke chains on a world they had no reason to care about. Then he spoke. "They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Their planet shook beneath their feet. Their oceans drowned them. Their weather froze them and burned them and tore their homes apart. The animals around them were faster, stronger, and more deadly. They were not the top of their food chain, my emperor. They were in the middle. Everything hunted them." He paused and let the words settle in the silent chamber. But they did not die. They refused to. When something threatened them, they did not evolve thicker skin or bigger claws. They evolved bigger minds. They learn to work together in ways that no other species ever has. They share knowledge, they build on each other's ideas, and they adapt faster than anything the galaxy has ever produced. Every enemy they have ever faced has made them stronger. Every defeat has made them smarter. They treat war itself not as a contest of strength, but as a problem to be solved, and they solve it better every single time. He looked directly into the Emperor's eyes. You asked me what they are. They are what happens when prey refuses to stop fighting. They are what happens when the hunted becomes the hunter. And the worst part, my Emperor, is that they do not enjoy it. They do not want war. They would have been happy to sit on their little blue world and live in peace. But you went to their home. You threatened their children. You tried to burn their world. And now they are awake and they are angry. And they will never, ever forget. The chamber was utterly silent. 3 days later, a single human ship appeared in orbit above Dralos Prime. It was not a warship. It carried no weapons that the hegemony could detect. It was a diplomatic vessel, white and smooth, and it descended through the atmosphere with the casual confidence of a creature that feared nothing. Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez walked into the Obsidian Citadel alone. She wore a simple gray uniform with no medals, no decorations, and no visible weapons. She was a small woman in a room full of beings that could have torn her apart with their bare hands. She walked as if she owned the place. She stopped before the Emperor's throne and looked up at Zorath the Knight. I will keep this short, she said. Your fleet is destroyed. Your border systems are exposed. The species you enslaved are waking up, and they are looking at you the way you used to look at them. This is what is going to happen. She held up one finger. First, you will release every enslaved species in the Orion Arm, all of them, immediately. She held up a second finger. Second, your ships will never enter human space again. Not one ship, not ever. She held up a third finger. Third, in exchange for these two things, we will not come for your throne. She paused, and the tiniest smile crossed her face. Yet. The word hung in the air like a blade. Zorath stared at her. He could have ordered her killed. He could have crushed her where she stood. But he looked into her calm gray eyes and saw something that he had never seen in any creature before. He saw someone who was not afraid of him, not brave in spite of fear, not putting on a show of courage. Simply, completely, genuinely unafraid. You would threaten me in my own citadel? He whispered. I am not threatening you, Vasquez said. I am telling you what is going to happen. The only choice you have is whether it happens peacefully or not. Zorath accepted the terms. As Vasquez walked back through the corridors of the Obsidian Citadel, she passed a figure standing in the shadows. It was General Tarvek, old and scarred and stripped of everything he had once been. She stopped. You tried to warn them, she said. That took courage. He looked at her with tired eyes. It did not matter, they did not listen. No, but you tried anyway. That matters. If your empire falls, and it will, you will have a place among us. You earned that 20 years ago, when you were the only one smart enough to be afraid. She walked away. Tarvek watched her go, this small, soft-skinned creature who had just dictated terms to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. And for the first time in 20 years, the old general smiled. On 100 worlds across the galaxy, the whispers spread. A species called humans, small, soft, with no claws and no armor. They had fought the hegemony and won. They had broken chains and asked for nothing. They had stared into the eyes of the most powerful being in the galaxy and told him what to do. On 100 worlds, enslaved species